So let's continue with our discussion of Sherwin's article, Abortion Through a Feminist Ethics Lens. We've seen that she approaches the problem from the context of women's lives. She prioritizes women's lives. That's not the result. That prioritizing is not something she argues for. That's a starting point. And also we saw that the notion of a decision as to whether or not to terminate or to carry a pregnancy through is a right that the pregnant woman has, and that's not something that can be bounded in any way, and doesn't have the reasons don't have to be offered or justified. It is simply up to the pregnant individual. All right. She then turns and looks at the concept, the issue of the fetus, and as we saw, she has a very contextualized notion of it, so we can kind of see where she's going to be going, as opposed to the abstract approach, which does not consider the lived environment of the fetus, namely the body of the pregnant person. So, but let's look a little bit at what Sherwin says the non-feminist view of the fetus, regards it as a person. Now, this concept of personhood, it's an old chestnut, great old topic in philosophy. You don't find it that much in ancient thought, although some scholars would probably disagree with me there. But primarily it gets kick-started really in the philosophy of John Locke and his successors. And you find it, of course, all over the place in literature, like Proust and various writers in the French tradition. Joyce was also in the Irish tradition, was very interested in it. David Hume, the great Scottish philosopher, wrote stuff on the notion of personhood and what does it mean to be a person. So this is a deep, rich, and difficult concept. German idealist Hegel wrote on this as well. Kant, you name it. After Locke, everybody has something to say about it. Not surprisingly, Sherwin is going to say this is a very important thing that we have to talk about, and we got to get this concept right. Well, in the abstract approach, according to Sherwin, she says, look, people say that the fetus, they kind of take two lines on it. It's a person, right? Say, as when we talk about, having a baby and all that, and we do naturally kind of talk that way. That doesn't mean it's right, but that's how a lot of people talk about it. Well, it's a little person, right? A person is a person no matter how small, an old Dr. Seuss line. Well, okay, what does that really mean? Well, a person then, if you consider the fetus, if you take that line on the fetus as a person, then you would say things like, well, persons should be protected by the law, and you can't kill them, and all kinds of things like that. So the logic more or less kind of flows naturally. But again, as we know, arguments are composed of premises, and premises have concepts in them, and it's not enough just for the argument to flow. That's validity, but you have to ask yourself of soundness, right? And is your premise true? Is it really true that the fetus is a person? Well, if it is, they must be protected, entirely protected. So the minute you have a fetus, and of course people run this even further, they talk about, the fertilized egg and everything. Right? There's a person there from the beginning, right? And hence the life begins at conception. There's a person there right from the beginning, and we believe in the protection of persons. Very few people are going to say, no, I don't believe persons should be protected, but the argument will be, well, is the fertilized egg, is the fetus a person? Okay, so that's one line that Sherwin says, that's kind of the abstract approach. And so you get that in the entirely protected. Then someone might say, well, I'm not really going to say that the fertilized egg, or maybe the minute something is scientifically classified as a fetus, that maybe it's a proto-person, right? And a number of like Philippa Foot wrote a classic article on abortion, and she says that this is one of the things that pulls us. She said naturally it's pretty difficult to look at a fertilized egg and say that's a person. But on the other hand, just before birth, well, I'm trying not to beg any questions, but just before the birth occurs, an hour or something before, it's pretty hard to say, it's not a baby, it's not a person. So she said you're really pulled in different directions on this. And Sherwin admits that more or less, but she does want to put her foot down because of the larger political ramifications of opening this up, right? If you open up the notion of choice to debate, well, then it's going to ultimately undermine the right to choose. So the proto person, you could say, well, I don't think that the fetus is necessarily a person, maybe until after so many weeks or something like that, or so many whatever trimester. And often laws do put in restrictions, right? You can have an abortion up and it's legal. So forget the moral issue. The legal issue is you can have it up to a certain date, and then after that, no. So that's kind of the proto-person view. So the proto-person must be protected after, and I'm gonna put these in scare quotes, like the fetus is a proto-person, but then it becomes a person, and it becomes a person before birth. The law kind of functions like that. So you could take this sort of non-feminist view, yeah, I believe in a woman's absolute right to choose, but only up to a point, right? So the minute there's a pregnancy, yeah, you're pregnant, and it's early on, well, then you have the absolute right to make decisions, totally up to you. But after a certain time, no. So that's not a feminist position, according to Sherwin. And so you can think, so just if someone just says pro-choice, what exactly do you mean by that? Are you pro-choice just for a while, or pro-choice right through to the end? The pro-choice right through to the end, that's the feminist position, again, according to Sherwin. So what's the problem with these views, ultimately? She thinks that they ignore dependency, that the feminist position takes that the fetus is a dependent organism on the mother, or the pregnant female, whatever. Mother might even be begging terms, but the pregnant woman, the fetus is subordinated or dependent, however you want to put it. These ignore this. They regard personhood just in the abstract. Sherwin also thinks that medical technology tends to undermine this by referring to, sometimes, they talk about surgery on a fetus. They'll talk about the fetus, the little patient, right? Sherwin doesn't say a lot about this, but she says that this tends to undermine the dependency notion. You don't go in for, and you can think of an analogy. It'd be odd if you went in for heart surgery and the doctor referred to your heart as the patient, right? You'd be referring to you as the patient, not your heart. So, because your heart is not really a heart if you yank it out. It's a heart in the context of a system. That's again stressing the dependency, and she thinks that the medical model of pregnancy, right? Notice that pregnancy is not something that just that its meaning is just self-evident. It's an interpretation. So the medical model of pregnancy undermines this dependency, which in turn supports this view, which undermines the feminist view. Okay, what does Sherwin think? Okay, so we've given her sort of like the negative side, her criticism, but what does she think that is going on here? How should we understand the fetus? Well, she starts off with, again, that old chestnut, what's personhood? What is the nature of a person? And she says that personhood is a fundamentally relational notion, right? So in that sense, that personhood is not something that you can really have as a fetus. It doesn't really make any sense that you could call a fetus a person, because it's fundamentally relational. Now, what does that mean? Again, I alluded to it earlier when you say to your friend, get a life. You're not talking about getting a biological life. The biological life is there. You're talking about a relational concept, like get out there in the world, meet other people, do some stuff, stop sitting around in a room reading all the time. You have to do something. Don't watch TV all day or whatever. Get out and relate, get a life, which means you have a relational existence. So persons then, to have personhood is to have a relational existence. What does that mean? Well, persons are members of a social community. Social communities shape the person shapes the community. The person values the community values the person. It's a dynamic, interactive relationship. And you are a person defined in terms of interactions and relations with others. Sometimes we even talk about this, when if you've ever been around like a newborn or whatever, and it's like, it's just a little organism there. And then once they start reacting, right, everybody gets all excited about the newborn's first little grin, and it's usually just because product of digestion. But eventually, when a baby starts reacting or a newborn starts reacting, sometimes we'll say things like, "Oh, there's a little person is coming out now," or "the person is forming," or whatever. So this idea of being a person is a dynamic and a relational notion. So humans then participate in a wide variety of relations, right? That's what makes us human. And you don't really have that. It doesn't make sense to talk about having that before birth. Until birth, the fetus is, certainly it's alive, no one's debating that, but it's a unique form, a unique sort, this again, according to Sherwin, that only has a relationship with one, the pregnant female's body. That's it. There's so in essence, the fetus is a part of the system of the woman, kind of like an organ. The woman can survive without the fetus, but not basically vice versa. And anyone else who tries to help or hinder or whatever has to do something to the woman first to get at the fetus. So she thinks this biological structure is important, and it gives the ultimate responsibility and authority to the person who is pregnant. And so the feminist view of the fetus then stems from the feminist view of what persons really are, and persons are humans in social systems. So even making a distinction between human and person, right? And so we might question that, but of course maybe the fetus is kind of like a sort of a human, but it's not really a person. You could maybe argue that line, and just like we often admit that the concept of person is broader than just applying to humans, because higher primates, maybe an elephant. I sometimes think my dog is a person of sorts. So has interests and desires and wants and bugs me for stuff. So in that sense, we should open ourselves up to a more flexible understanding of person, and it is one that is relational. So even with dogs and puppies, they become really true dogs in the context of living with other dogs. We often call this, we got to socialize your dog if you want to have a good dog, a healthy dog, and so on. So but Sherwin's not saying that a fetus has no value. It has a lot of value. It's intensely valuable, and a value to the woman, and this value grows in intensity over time. She's not denying that. She's not treating the fetus as it's like a heart, not an appendix, right? So in that sense, the value is there, but ultimately in the sense that this idea of, well, we should replace abortion with, just simply, making women carry babies to term and then give the baby up for adoption, so then the woman doesn't have to deal with all the unwanted pregnancy. That, she thinks, is akin to that medical model of turning women into they're just receptacles, right? In which, like an incubator, which a baby just grows. And she says that medical model encourages that, and other kinds of social programs that would adoption over abortion also reinforce that notion of the independence of the fetus, pushing you in this direction, and looking at women more as passive receptacles, which she thinks is an incorrect view of the situation. So there's a very dynamic, interactive, and the important thing is that the feminist view regards personhood as fundamentally relational, and that's not going to happen for a fetus. So in the next couple sections of the article, we'll see her go into more detail in terms of the politics of abortion.